gentlemen. My topic today is youth at risk, so I take you in a slightly different direction. One of the greatest challenges to environmental, social, and economic sustainability is engaging youth at risk, making them part of future prosperity and not the source of future instability. Youth bulge dynamics in demographics patterns are well known. In this slide, with a focus on the Arab world, we see 70% of the population is under the age of 30, a demographic dynamic we cannot afford to ignore. I'm going to focus in particular today on youth at risk as it relates to drug trafficking and cartels and insurgencies. So focus on that cohort of fighting-age young men who are at risk to be recruited to cartels or insurgencies. First, to the issues of youth and drug policy. At the heart of this issue, we at ICOS believe that the core approach to global drugs policy is misguided and needs substantial reorganization and renovation. The organization I lead, now called the International Council on Security and Development, did its first work in 1998, 17 years ago, a product of both the intellectual and philanthropic leadership of Dr. Stefan Schmidheiny. We launched a project to run concurrently with the 1998 UN General Assembly Special Session on Drugs in New York City to open debate on the shortcomings and negative consequences of the global war on drugs. We organized a 2 full-page advertisement, an open letter to the UN, in the New York Times and other international newspapers with hundreds of prominent international signatories. I know some of you are thinking, print newspaper, very retro, very old media, ancient history. Not only that, we collect the authorization of the signatories with a machine called a fax. We spent a lot of time at the fax machine. Some of you here will remember the fax machine. Some of you have never seen one, so here's a picture complete with instructions. I want to take you back in time to 17 years ago. Our open letter called for a review of global drug policy and for a frank and honest evaluation of global drug control efforts. It read in part, "We are all deeply concerned about the threat that drugs pose to our children, our fellow citizens, and our societies. But we believe that the global war on drugs is now causing more harm than drug abuse itself." It went on to say, "The illegal drug industry has empowered organized criminals, corrupted governments, stimulated violence, and distorted both economic, markets, and moral values. These are the consequences not of drug use per se, but of decades of failed and futile drug war policies. Human rights are violated, and prisons inundated with hundreds of thousands of drug law violators. Scarce resources, better expended on health, education, and development, are squandered on ever more expensive interdiction efforts." These words of critique of the drug war are as relevant today as they were 17 years ago. Afghanistan. Afghanistan is at the heart of the drug war. Afghanistan is the world's largest producer of opium for heroin, producing over 80% of the world's supply. As a result, our work in this controversial area led to the launch of a project specifically focused on addressing Afghans' opium production. I lived and worked for 7 years in southern Afghanistan, leading our research projects in rural areas with a focus on fighting-age males, drug policy reform, and insurgencies. When I first arrived after the invasion, it was relatively safe to travel and live in the south, but as time passed, we saw the return of the Taliban firsthand, and their recruitment of young men and their involvement in drug trafficking and heroin production. What we learned in our years of work is that the international community's counter-narcotic efforts worked at cross purposes with our overarching strategy to win the hearts and minds of the Afghan people. Our main project in Afghanistan is the Poppy for Medicine project. This project focuses on alternative policies to drug war approaches by allowing impoverished Afghan poppy farmers to continue to grow poppies, but for the production of medicine, morphine. From opium poppies, you can produce not only heroin, but the pain medicine, morphine. The economic resources created by the sale of medicines would provide opportunities for the village economy to diversify and to break their ties with the opium trade and the Taliban. Additionally, there is a global shortage of morphine, especially in Africa, Latin America, and ironically, in Afghanistan itself. The World Health Organization has reported a global pain crisis. Tens of millions of people suffer from severe pain and do not have access to medicine to relieve the pain. Only the 6 richest countries in the world have a sufficient and regular supply. So the pain relief that everyone in this room expects in the event of a medical emergency is not available in many countries. We argue that Afghan morphine can contribute to decreasing the acute global shortage and provide cheap pain medicines to countries who cannot currently afford them. The project would turn the international community into the poppy farmers' business partner, severing their current economic relationship with the Taliban and criminal elements. We see this approach as an elegant and innovative response to a seemingly intractable problem and the failure of drug war policies. Regrettably, this proposal has not yet been accepted by the international community, despite the following statistics issued by the UN Office on Drug Control. They are so dramatic, I go year by year. In 2011, there was a 7% increase in poppy cultivation in Afghanistan. The following year, 2012, a further 18% increase in poppy cultivation. 2013, a 36% increase. In 2014, this last year, we've just seen the results. Cultivation rose another 7%, with a warning that production could potentially increase 17%. So under current drug war policy from 2011 to 14, there's been an 82% increase in poppy cultivation in Afghanistan. These policies cannot be described as successful or effective. In any way, a new approach is needed. Over the years, we expanded our research. I worked in Mogadishu, Djibouti, some areas of Latin America, Iraq, and most recently, Aleppo and Idlib in northern Syria during the current war. Our research on the recruitment process of cartels and insurgencies focuses on inoculating the large number of youth at risk, unemployed young men from being drawn into insurgency or criminal activity. Recruitment to drug cartels or insurgencies focus on cohorts with high unemployment levels, living in communities with high poverty levels, low access to education, low level of marriage prospects, all of which contributes to a weak sense of self, of identity, of fairness. Our current responses to these dynamics is misinformed without sufficient understanding of the worldview of the at-risk cohort. This schematic is an arrow we developed from our research illustrating the basic stages of being recruited to an insurgency or a cartel. So you go from anger and discontentment to recruitment, training, indoctrination, and violent action. And we normally meet these young men with military and police security instruments at the end of the arrow. Our critique is that we're better to focus on an intervention at an earlier stage, which means understanding and responding to the worldview and perceptions that lead to anger and discontentment. Let me give you 2 examples of how we missed opportunities to block recruitment of youth by insurgencies or cartels. One of our most famous or infamous pieces of research from southern Afghanistan was several years into the war. I come to suspect that the presence of international troops in Afghanistan was misunderstood by the Afghan people. The Taliban and al-Qaeda told the local population that the NATO forces were in Afghanistan to destroy Islam, a continuation of a religious conflict going back to the Crusades. Of course, we know the US and NATO forces were in Afghanistan as a result of the events of 9/11 and the Taliban alliance with al-Qaeda. We developed a research protocol to ask if young men in southern Afghanistan recognized the famous pictures of the planes crashing into the Twin Towers in New York City on 9/11. But remember, during the relevant time in Afghanistan, there was only 14% literacy in a society without electricity, televisions, and newspapers. This was an extremely isolated, very basic village life. Our research revealed that in southern Afghanistan, where the war against al-Qaeda and the Taliban was being prosecuted, where young men were being recruited to fight for the Taliban, Only 10% recognized the picture or knew the story of the events of 9/11. Let's consider the consequence of this on our attempts to gain the support of the local population and inoculate the youth in the area against recruitment. It had not occurred to the international community that this information had not penetrated the village communities. It is so much an integral part of our own worldview and understanding. Another illustration from our research showing our weakness in understanding the local dynamics around recruitment occurred around the same time. We were looking at unemployment issues in fighting-age men. The only regular income available was working in the harvest of poppies, heroin production, or income from fighting for the Taliban. Without income, aside from the usual issues of poverty, a young man in southern Afghanistan could not pay the marriage dowry that is absolutely necessary to marry, around $3,000 USD, depending on the status of the bride. As a result, if you didn't join the heroin industry or the Taliban, your chances of marrying and all that that means in terms of identity, purpose, and human and family connection were denied. So finding a means to earn an income to pay a dowry, either in heroin production or as a Taliban fighter, trumped any political question of whether you supported or did not the position of the international community, NATO forces, or the Afghan government. I mention these last two research projects as an illustration of the importance of deconstructing social dynamics in communities with youth at risk, an attempt to break the recruitment cycle before recruitment, rather than meeting these youth after their recruitment, which is exponentially more difficult to disengage them from the cartel, the drug gang, or the insurgents group. What next for ICOS? Going back to our first project with the fax machine. Our strength is our grassroots research work. We've traditionally done extensive field research in conflict zones, meaning one-on-one interviews with literally thousands of members of the fighting-age male cohort in dozens of research rounds in numerous villages, towns, cities, and countries. Moving on from our first old media project, we are opening a new division with that same grassroots focus, the ICOS Social Media Watch, which looks at social media landscaping as it relates to insurgencies, corrupt economies, etc. We have teamed with a tech startup with high sentiment accuracy in its data gathering algorithms that allows us to map social media data on topics of relevance in all languages, in all regions, either in current time or looking back. It allows us to see the positives and negatives on various topics and illuminates who are the key influencers in social media markets. We hope to use this capability in the next years on our projects and in partnership with others who share our concerns on relevant social and economic issues. In closing, I want to acknowledge again the intellectual and philanthropic leadership of Dr. Schmidt-Heine and those involved in his philanthropic work. In the case of our projects, we needed an extra ingredient, the moral courage to address difficult and popular questions and to support the risk taken to pursue this work. With many thanks to you, sir, and your colleagues, we hope for the continued success of our work on these important issues.